People share her videos, yeah. So there's a couple of things, right? Tomi Lahren really launched onto the public scene when she was about 22 years old. And she talked about how President Obama wasn't taking leadership. He wasn't being a leader. He wasn't calling jihadis Muslims, right? He wasn't using language that was really being a leader. So she really launches onto the national scene when she was at a smaller network at that time. It was called On Point with Tomi Lahren. Then she currently has a show on the Blaze network. And every day a segment of that show gets put onto a Facebook clip online, just called Final Thoughts with Tomi Lahren. And that's what tends to go viral. And Trevor will explain some of this stuff too for the folks walking in. Just wanted to get started and have you guys engaged. And okay, so I will definitely get started.
We were talking about how Facebook is both dominating the news industry and maybe destroying it. And we saw one of the most popular voices at the forefront, Tomi Lahren. She's a conservative host with her own show on the Blaze network. But what people really know her for are the short, punchy daily attacks that she posts to Facebook that are called Final Thoughts. And these videos routinely get millions of views. Right? Tomi's videos get shared more than the Kardashians share the game. And here's the really interesting part. Despite her numbers, a lot of viewers like you at home might never have even seen her. Because Facebook doesn't think you want to see her. Because you probably listed your favorite things as Fair Trade Coffee, or Missy Elliott, and the bird from Bernie Sanders' podium. Who, by the way, is now also with Hillary. Sellout. So anyway, Tomi is basically like a super famous actor in a foreign country, except the foreign country is your country. And if you haven't watched one of Tomi's videos yet, you are missing out. Do you guys remember the speech Jesse Williams gave at the BET Awards? Yeah? You saw it. All big, all online. Right? He spoke out on police brutality, racial inequality, the co-opting of black culture, and a lot of people loved it. But Tomi had a different take.
I'm sorry, Jesse, but I won't be apologizing for my whiteness, just as you don't need to apologize for your blackness. It's not white people working to divide America. It's you. You and Beyonce and Jada Pinkett Smith and Al Sharpton. Do you see yourself as a victim? If so, I feel sorry for you. For someone who wants equal rights, it sure sounds like you prefer special treatment. It sure sounds like you'd like a gold star at the end of the day just for being born. Get over yourself.
God damn! So much passion and energy. I'm black and I've never been that excited about the BET Awards. She was at home and she was like, oh, hell no! Hell no! This speech is bull and 2 Chainz lost? Oh, hell no! Now, we could go into the fact that Jesse Williams' speech wasn't actually anti-white people, it was anti-oppression, but that's not what this is about. This is about a crazy talented person named Tomi Lahren and her amazing ability to take almost any topic and turn it into fire.
Make America Great Again means being able to say, God bless America, loudly and proudly. Call me old-fashioned, but I still believe the thing in your pants really isn't up for negotiation. Can't say tranny, transvestite, illegal alien, Indian, redskin. We get it, you're gay. Please tell me in what way black Americans are not equal. I'm waiting. I know the feminists are going to go crazy over this. Guess what, Beyonce? White people like your music, too. He's also married to the biggest sack of lies to ever squeeze into a rectangular pantsuit. Radical Islamic terror is the culprit. All out pansy fest. God bless from Dallas. Good night, and take care.
Wow. That is the least woke, most awake person I have ever seen.
Yeah, so that's definitely one set. We're gonna skip and see a little bit more. Yes, definitely the most awake, least woke person we have ever seen. All right, let's bring it to.
I support the First Amendment. I support your right to freedom of speech and expression. Go for it, bud. It's this country, the country that you have so much disdain for, that allows you the right to speak your mind. It protects your right to be a whiny, indulgent, attention-seeking crybaby. It also protects my right to shred you for it. And Colin, if this country disgusts you so much, leave.
Wow, Tomi, that is That statement is so ignorant. Kaepernick can't leave. America is the only place that plays football. But I must say, I do love this logic. Shut up and be happy that no one forces you to shut up. Because that's what makes this country great, is that you can't complain. So stop complaining. Now you might be wondering, Trevor, hey, why do you care what some random person on Facebook says? Because that's just it. She's not random. You know how many views her Kaepernick video got? 65 million. Yeah. Do you realize how much that is? That's way more than all of cable news combined, plus network news, plus the country's top newspapers. People, her video was more popular than that video of the turtle having sex with a shoe. Way more popular than that. Look at that. Look at that. Look at...
Okay, now you have to look at me. So that is just, I wanted to give a taste of Trevor Noah really... Sorry, let me pull up the presentation. So this is Trevor Noah talking about why we should have this conversation, right? One of the things he says is that Tomi Lahren is now... Tomi Lahren is now mainstream media. Okay? She's not a fringe person just because she exists on Facebook and on some feeds and not others, right? More people are paying attention to what she has to say than really all the other mainstream media. So we're going to talk a little bit about how Tomi specifically as a person, as a figure, is actually really good for something like Final Thoughts on Facebook. So one of the things that I want to bring up is the attitudes towards social movements. So she talked a little bit about Kaepernick being a crybaby, and I want to point out the structure that really tends to follow a lot of the things you hear over and over again, what conservatives or the people that, you know, I was trying to plug this on Facebook, and I said most people have one of two opinions on Tomi Lahren. Either she speaks your truth, or you want to set your hair on fire when you're listening to her. So for the people who, you know, she's speaking their truth, there's a general structure that I see repeated in a lot of this kind of rhetoric, right? What oppression? First of all, this is America, right? Nobody's enslaved. Nobody, you know, everyone has a generally great lifestyle. You know, nobody's really being oppressed. And so, you know, first of all, is like a total absence of recognition of racism, sexism, homophobia, and any of these social issues as being truly systemic threats, right? You might, okay, racism, yeah, okay, you know, you might say that somebody picked on you, you know, you might think that modern day racism is just like discrimination, or like somebody said the N-word to you, right? It has this superficial quality instead of being deeply systemic, and deeply, you know, there's no... I think as liberals, a lot of time, and I'm going to go ahead and say it, right? I'm liberal. As liberals, we talk about oppression being everything from microaggressions to mass incarceration, right? All that falls under oppression. So there's really, when you cover this really big scale, it's really easy, I think, for people to really wonder, if you're talking about microaggressions and like, you know, using politically correct language, like, that's not really my thing. Transgender bathrooms, like, bathroom issues, no, I'm focused on real things like jobs. Okay? So when we talk about oppression as being this really big scale of things, it can be really easy to lose sight that it even exists. So for many people, it doesn't. Then the next, the logical consequence of the fact that there's no oppression is that you're making yourself a victim, right? You are complaining. You know, you're blaming other people for your problems instead of solving them for yourself. You're dependent on other people. You know, you're making yourself a victim. This is all, you know, you are bringing light to these divisions. You're reinforcing racism by talking about it, right? So you're making yourself a victim. And then the third thing is special treatment. If there is no oppression, and if you are making yourself a victim, the final logical leap is that you want some kind of special treatment. Tomi Lahren refers to Black Lives Matter as Black Lives Matter More, right? And so it's this idea of I'm a hardworking American just like you. Why should I give special treatment to somebody just because we're gay? We get it, right? that kind of thing. Why should we give you special treatment, especially because me, as a white male living in a flyover state, recently lost my job and got laid off. I have very real issues right now. I'm struggling to make ends meet. I'm a white person, I have problems too, right? All of these things, especially because me as a person who has a dominant identity, right? The people who have theoretically nothing wrong with their lives, straight, white, heterosexual, cisgendered men, right? These people, you know, I fall into one, let's say you fall into one of those categories, you have problems too. And you're attuned to your own problems, and you may not see why you shouldn't focus on yourself and instead have to give all this attention to these social identities that are seeking special treatment. Yeah, so that's something that really gets highlighted in the ways that she comes to talk about her problems. So I mentioned, for those of you stepping in late, Tomi Lahren, as a 22-year-old, launched into the national spotlight for going for one of her rants that went viral on Facebook. One of the reasons Tomi Lahren is so successful is because she's hot, she's skinny, right? She is someone who knows how to be on social media. As somebody who is a young millennial, a young person, she knows how to conduct herself. She can be professional, right? If your heart is filled with patriotism, there is no room for prejudice. This is a classic example of the colorblindness mentality, and somebody who is professional and is like a young maverick rock star, and also somebody who is an average 22 to 24-year-old. She's now 24. You could see one of your friends posting an Instagram like this, and there's really no division between Tomi Lahren as a political pundit or as just another person on Instagram. So one, she's really angry, right? The first question Trevor Noah asks her is, Tomi, why are you so angry? And she says, I'm not angry, I'm just, some people got to be called on their shit. Right? She's speaking truth to power. This is part of how she conducts herself. Part of one of the things that make Trevor Noah, I'm going to focus on Tomi because Trevor Noah is picking up on an established track. He's on a comedy network, Comedy Central. He's following in the footsteps of John Stewart and Stephen Colbert. This has been done before. And it's a little bit weird that he's a South African who's like trying to be involved in American things. Like, nobody really asks why he's here, but he's far less interesting. And what you see in the clip that I showed in the beginning is that Trevor Noah really respects what she's been able to do. He understands. He's in the media business. Way more people are paying attention to her than him, right? So why does this work? And one of the reasons I felt really compelled to give this presentation is because when Trump won, everyone was like, how? Every single poll, media outlet was like, Hillary's going to win, Hillary's going to win, Hillary's going to win. Oh, shit, right? She didn't win, and that's because the people who are circulating this they're staying within their own Facebook feeds, right? They're not really leaving that feed. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of the comments that she receives, so what I mentioned there is one narrative, but a lot of the comments she receives are from people who hate her. The comments are anger. They come out of anger. It's like, oh, nobody posted anything racist on your feed today, and you still want to lash out? Log on to one of these pages, and you can definitely have a long vent session and find. So a lot of people, I think, also watch her videos, especially now, because they're just so much. And then I think I mentioned this before. Why? Tomi Lahren is now mainstream. How do we keep up with this? So a couple of things that I'm going to point out as I see it being relevant to the way Tomi Lahren functions is part of a larger mentality that is really a rhetorical strategy. As soon as something is liberal, it can't be trusted, right? All of the media, mainstream media or like traditional media, is liberal, has a liberal bias, so suddenly it's discounted. Oh, you're just saying that because you're liberal. Right? That's part of how you can then start to divorce yourself from facts, right? Or what the traditional media platforms will say, and then you can, this is where this alternative facts thing comes from. That's just the liberal media peddling their agenda. And really it's this inability to distinguish between how bias functions as a perspective and like what is actually trying to be facts that are reported. So if you can't trust anything liberal, and the media is liberal, you can't trust the media. So there goes there goes the New York Times, there goes NPR, there goes BBC. All these things are sort of tossed out the window. The other thing is this defense against this wanting to counter being politically correct. Nobody's used the word politically correct in a positive way, like I'm really glad you're politically correct. And so in naming the situation of Donald Trump being a raging, sexist, misogynistic, insert ist person here, one of the ways to dismiss that is like, well, he's just choosing not to be politically correct, right? And in some ways, this rhetoric maybe does echo other, things that people are saying, the locker room talk or whatever. In some ways, it's recognizing that he's using these things as a rhetorical tool to get attention in the media, that he doesn't really mean them, right? A perfect quote is that the American people took Donald Trump seriously and not literally, and the American media and the left took Donald Trump literally, not seriously. And so focusing in on his tweets, focusing in on sort of the ridiculous things he's saying, really doesn't pay attention to his strategy overall. And it's only after the fact that we begin to see how he was reaching people. Now, how many of you went to the Martin Luther King keynote speaker, Dr. Ian Haney Lopez, who talked about dog whistle politics? Okay, so only a few of you, but I did want to, especially at the end, give you the opportunity to talk about maybe some connections between what I was doing and what he was doing, because it was relevant, so I wanted to put that in there. So I want to talk about maybe this idea of self-victimization as being the complaining minority is maybe the new welfare queen, right? Law and order. All of these things that dog whistles are words that aren't like, hey, I hate black people, right? But is coded racial language that's more acceptable to say publicly, and therefore using it. Now, one could argue that Donald Trump isn't actually that subtle, that Tomi Lahren isn't actually that subtle in the way that she talks about race, but this language of either colorblindness or self-victimization, one of the short clips that they flashed with Tomi is like, she's waiting for black people to show her how they're actually oppressed, right? This is not an existent reality. And again, the complications that has, if it's not an existent reality, that oppression just doesn't exist in the way that liberals talk about it. Okay, so now I'm going to go back. Give me a minute to pull up the interview with them both. Just catch my breath a little bit. Sorry. Oh, hey there. I hope the audio comes on. Okay. Yeah. Why is it doing that? Oh, is the screen? This was working a second ago. Okay. Sorry. I don't know. All right. So do we want to wait for this to buffer, or do we want to move on? Okay, cool. So I guess in the meantime, I'll ask one or two questions, and if y'all don't feel like talking, it doesn't buffer, we're going to move on. Who thought Trevor Noah won the exchange? Was there a winner? Was there a clear winner? What?
There were no winners and there were no losers. It was simply a discussion. I thought you had it right there.
Okay, anyone else? Agree, disagree? Yeah.
Well, it seemed like Tomi Lahren it was kind of seemed like they were having two different conversations. It didn't really seem like they understood each other. So Trevor Noah probably won for liberals, and Tomi Lahren won for conservatives.
Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I think anybody watching The Daily Show, Tomi Lahren just comes across as crazy and screaming. But someone from her audience watches the same thing, it's a cheap, overpowered show. As a thought, by making it an us versus them situation, that's what gave her so much power, and what gives the other side things that makes everyone else think she's bigger than the character. So it shouldn't be who won the law issue, but how do we have an actual conversation? She did it have to do.
Wait, so you're saying she didn't, say that last part again, was she making an actual discourse, do you think? Did she participate in it in a way that was a real discourse?
She did to the extent that the person of her power is capable of doing. But by making it an us situation, we're not actually bridging any gap or rebuilding America. We're creating a further difference between liberal socialists and the employers.
Yeah, sure. And I think that part of why I pose that question is because it's what a lot of people will ask as soon as something is over, right? In the past, we had Bill O'Reilly come on The Daily Show with John Stewart and Stephen Colbert. Bill O'Reilly was that sort of antagonist. They had a back and forth. Now people are saying Tomi Lahren, Trevor Noah, they're the new Bill O'Reilly, John Stewart. That's why I pose that question, is because Trevor Noah's show has this history, and that's okay. It has this history, and this is sort of following in that legacy, and whether or not that still exists. Yeah, go ahead.
It was just kind of bizarre because neither of them refused to take any step toward the middle. They both had to be on the really far end of the spectrum. They wouldn't ever say anything subjective or just like, well, in certain cases it's this, in certain cases it's this. It had to be like, it's always very this way or it's always very this way.
Okay, I think that's an interesting observation, right? If your audience is predicated on an ideology, if you step back on your ideology at all, you're no longer people don't want to hear that, right? That's nuance, and that's really not good television. Anyone else have any thoughts on if somebody won, if somebody lost, if this was a good conversation, if it was a bad conversation, was it productive, was it not productive? Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's important to remember with these two people that they're not broadcast media, they're not journalists. These two people have a mandate to bring in viewers and cater to their kind of style. So I don't think this is necessarily a forum where it's a forum that's going to be entertaining to see these two sides clash, but it's not a forum where either of them can really concede to the other and have a meaningful back and forth debate where minds have changed. People who watch The Daily Show, people who watch The Blade, they know what they know, and for the most part, that's going to be it.
Okay. Anyone agree, disagree? So one of the things that Tomi Lahren says, she had a final thoughts segment after this show, and one of her main things was, saying what people have already said, that, he was a very liberal audience, the liberal audience booed her, Trevor Noah was not neutral in any way, and her quote was, he's a good guy, but he pegged me for a racist before I even walked in. Right? So this is another thing you hear a lot, is that white people, or white males, don't enjoy being characterized as either villainous or oppressive individuals, that this is in a lot of ways detrimental or attacking that person's character when you say white people are racist or any of these other things. So this is this idea of the left pegged me for a racist even before they got to know me. Is something you'll hear over and over again. No? Okay. Now it's not coming up at all. sorry about this. So I don't really have any, I wish I could show you some of these quotes, but I'll just read them out loud. So, in the slide that we left off, which was called Naming to Dismiss, we talked about ways that the strategies Tomi Lahren used to, talk about social issues, social movements, the left, and liberal media more broadly. And you see this characteristic not just of her, but of other people who either identify with her or are, would agree with her. And the next slide I entitled Keys for Productive Conversation. So, unfortunately, I can't show you a clip from the video itself, but I lay out about 3 or 4 things that Trevor Noah does. One is that he affirms the humanity of the conversant, right? So, one, he invited her onto her show, right? We talk about the absence, or this being a very entertainment-heavy platform. What are other spaces where this kind of dialogue would have ever happened? I have no idea, right? For a lot of people who watch Trevor Noah and only Trevor Noah, Tomi Lahren's appearance on the show was the first time you really got a glimpse of why people voted for Donald Trump, who those people were, what their thoughts were like. So by inviting her onto the show, he received a lot of praise and sort of it being a very exchange that was poignant. The other thing after the affirmation was what you might be able to do in everyday conversations is that once you legitimize the position of voting for Donald Trump, like, oh, yeah, you voted for Donald Trump, so I accept that. This is something that I understand. You voted for this one candidate for president. Something that can then follow and doesn't follow if you don't have that affirmation is comfort speaking. Right? If you demonize everyone who votes for Donald Trump, you're never going to let that conversation go any further. And then after you affirm this person, allow them the comfort to speak, you then, only then, have the opportunity to learn more about why they voted the way they voted. This puts somebody in the position of a listener instead of a spectator. Like, those are crazy people, and this is, these are what rational people are doing. That's sort of the mentality that will remain unless you affirm the humanity of the other. You allow them to feel comfortable speaking, and then give them the opportunity to elaborate. One of the ways that this exchange was productive, I think, for Trevor Noah was that he was able to mitigate emotional outrage and perceived irrationality by being in the listening position for a lot of the times. But as we talked about, neither one of them really gave up an inch or two. What doesn't help? What doesn't help an exchange between someone like Trevor Noah and Tomi Lahren, a liberal or conservative, on the extreme ends of the spectrum? Finding a view confounding. Why would anyone ever believe this? Finding it offensive, right? Wow, how dare Tomi Lahren talk about black people this way? I'm not going to listen to anything she has to say. And then the other thing is fighting the fight when you're tired, right? If you believe that your political views are sort of routinely trounced or are sort of overlooked, and you are too exhausted to deal with somebody who thinks differently than you, then you won't have that conversation. Okay. And it's hard for me to let you talk about this without giving you something to look at. And then, so a lot of the reaction to Tomi Lahren coming on Trevor Noah's show was praise. Wow, this was a huge, really sparks were flying in this conversation. They went head to head, toe to toe, all of these things. This was discourse. Finally, you had someone who didn't agree with Trevor Noah come on the show, right? This is not exactly Ta-Nehisi Coates. And the inverse of this praise for having discourse, this is just a regular student. Michael Dreher goes to Wesleyan University, is a contributor for the Huffington Post. He wrote a critique of Tomi Lahren's appearance on Trevor Noah. He says, this is perhaps the fundamental blind spot of white liberalism, the inability to understand that debating racism is not a political or academic pursuit for people of color. It's a matter of life and death. So when we fetishize discourse, we are fetishizing a fiction. Because the issues that most need to be fixed do not revolve around questions that have multiple valid answers, like whether or not we should bail out a bank. These are not questions, the answers to which are up for debate. There are opinions on these issues that we should fight with everything we have against normalizing, against making space for, as though they are the stuff of mere intellectual disagreement. Discourse is powerful because it validates. White supremacy should not be validated. So Tomi Lahren being, in this author's opinion, a voice for white supremacy is that she shouldn't have been given the platform to even express these views because they are so inherently sort of dehumanizing, right? So one of the things that we were talking about in the previous panel was liberal and conservative approach to social justice. But one thing that they might have in common is that these problems are real and we should work to address them. We might disagree on how, but that they actually exist. So this is the major critique of discourse. And really the question I want to pose to you is where does that line happen for you, right? Is it a question of this person just thinks differently than I do, or is it a question of this person's entire worldview is actually oppressive, right? There are no redeemable qualities to it, and actually don't function like somebody else said. They're having two different conversations, right? That sort of feeling you get of like, are they really talking to each other? Is there a one-to-one correlation? And one thing that I think my take on it, and then I'll open it up to what you have to say. My take on it is that if we don't have exchanges like this, we have no idea what's going on for most of our country. This is how people think. We should understand how they think, where they're coming from, what that means to them, how they're viewing the world. And that's not always easy or even attainable, but it's the effort. It's the effort to try. So I thought it was great he brought her on. I thought it was the first time I had never talked to a Trump supporter at the time that I was watching this video. It's the first time I got any insight and started looking into this more. I think it's very real that these people exist. They think that way. And again, the Lahren post of he thought I was a racist even before I got there. The way that we peg people into certain categories it impacts the way we see them as either human or not human, part of the conversation or not part of the conversation. And where do you draw that line, right? Would you engage with a KKK member? Would you engage with somebody who supports the KKK? Would you engage with the alt-right? Would you engage with the Tea Party? Would you, and from the other end, would you engage with the Hillary person? Would you engage with the Bernie person? Somebody who's Black Lives Matter, or is that too aggressive? Where do we draw the lines between who we talk to? And I really would love to hear from you all where that line sits for you. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think, in terms of, Trevor Noah bringing on Tomi Lahren, I thought that was a brilliant move because it did two things. One, it gets Tomi Lahren's viewers to see Trevor Noah's point of view, but also, two, to support his argument, he brought someone on, like Tomi Lahren. He didn't bring on a professor. He didn't bring on, an Dinesh D'Souza, a Ben Shapiro, someone who uses numbers. He didn't bring someone on who's, super smart and can make out the data. He brought kind of not to offend her, but kind of a JV kind of journalist. Her reporting is kind of lazy and she doesn't use a lot of numbers. So it was brilliant on his part because she represents the Republicans or Trump, and he basically put on kind of what his viewers are going to think is the idiot. So it was kind of a brilliant move in my opinion. If he wanted to do something really difficult, he could have brought on someone who is really smart, like a professor, or someone who's an established journalist who brings a lot of facts to the table.
Okay, so I'll ask a couple of questions. One, do people vote with facts?
Evidently not.
Well, that's saying if journalism is about facts and reporting facts, then maybe that's something we vote for. 64 million viewers on that one video alone. She has a captive audience, and I would argue she's more representative than Dinesh D'Souza or any of these people. More people are watching her. She's influencing more people. This is, in terms of a worldview, I think is an accurate characterization of what that really looks like. And worldviews are not couched in numbers for a lot of people, right? For a lot of people, mass incarceration isn't isn't statistics about the cradle to prison pipeline. It's about a lived experience. They live through it. They know people. That's how they know it's real. So in terms of exchanging worldviews, yeah, go ahead. Sure. Go ahead. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
I think to that point, I think you're right that people don't vote with numbers, but at the same time, I don't think Tomi Lahren, and I think Trevor Noah knew this, I don't think Tomi Lahren had any real chance. She had a chance to plant some ideas into the liberals' minds, but I don't think she really had a chance to even kind of convert some people on this issue, whereas I think if it was a Bill O'Reilly, and who isn't just shouting and seems to bring some kind of professionalism to the table, I think that was a tougher interview for Trevor Noah to be applauded for by his side, and that would have raised more eyebrows. So I think in terms of saying it was a strategic move in a certain part to have somebody Trevor Noah could go toe-to-toe with, and I think most of his supporters think he came out on top.
Okay. Glasses. I'm sorry. You? Pink sweater? Did you raise your hand? And then maroon sweater. Cool. Okay, so whereas before we were hearing Tomi Lahren is a straw woman, Noah brought her in because he knew he could beat her and was more experienced, older, all these things. That's why she didn't stand a chance. But you're saying that just having her on, that was a really productive thing because it was two different perspectives. Am I hearing that right? Okay. Go ahead.
I think having her on was interesting because she's inflammatory, and I think she got popular because her statements are so out there and people just go loud when they hear her speak. But in addition to being a cool show to have competing viewpoints on, I think Tomi is not representative of all conservative thinking millennial women. So by having her on, I think people who just watched her are saying, oh my gosh, all women who are conservative thinking must talk like this all the time. But wouldn't it have been interesting to have someone who's more toned down on the show? So I don't think that Tomi has become the representative for all women who voted for Trump, for all women who have their viewpoints. But I don't think she's necessarily representative.
Okay, great. So we talked, and I think there's a general consensus that in entertainment there's really no room for subtlety or nuance. But sort of the importance of these people who are inflammatory, people tend to flock towards, right, sort of increasing the divides because these are the people that stand out. Maroon sweater?
Contrasting, I don't really think it was productive because for both sides that watched it, stereotype the other. But two people on completely opposite spectrums, you had an audience watching them argue. Like, nothing productive is going to happen, and you're just going to have polarizing opinions on basically the audience. I think, like, people who watch those two, I don't remember the names, they watch for comedy. One's on Comedy Central, the other one uploads many clips of basically, like, people aren't looking at them for news or, like, that solely towards them for opinions, and I
Okay, Cliff, John, Blue Jacket, and Alex.
Kind of in response to that, I think like you were saying, that regardless of if a quantifiable outcome happens and it shows the changes being made, just being able to hear an opposing argument, I think is really important, and I think it gets you to think about things even if you don't realize you're thinking about them. But to answer your earlier question about where the discourse begins or ends, I think that you hit the nail on the head when you said dehumanizing things are where the conversation ends. When a person's opinion is no longer an opinion and is something that is tearing someone down for some reason. That's what it means.
John.
No thanks to those that are there. I don't have the exact in front of me, but I do know that a large majority of people, especially in our generation, do watch Comedy Central solely to get information. That's the only news source that they turn to. So assuming that people don't, it's just, you can find on the internet. I don't think that's correct. Now, whether that's what you should be doing is a whole other, that's entirely. But I think, especially in this day and age, networks like Comedy Central are aware of that, are aware that a lot of people are using them as that primary news source, whether it's a good idea or not. And therefore, I think having that discourse was a smart move because it showed, like Washington said, regardless of whether the conversation itself was, productive, because it was extremist on both sides, just having, one person on one side talking to a person on the other side was, I think, very symbolically resonant because you have a lot of times people on both sides just don't even talk to each other, whether the actual content of the conversation is correct or not. And then I was going to say about your original point, online. I think if you're just kind of a dialogue with somebody, I really don't think there really is a line. Like me as a disabled individual, I would talk to someone who's incredibly able to the point where they would physically persecute disabled people just get one perspective. The only line I would have is whether I was personally threatened, because at a certain point, and I don't mean this in the wrong way, but words are words, and I'm not saying that words can't, but as long as I didn't feel personally threatened, I would talk anyway, because people are people, we all have different.
So I would, combining some of the things people said, I would stray away from the fact that they're both extremists, right? I would think of them more as representative of worldviews, right? Whether or not they're extremists on one side or another. People said this in the election, the post-election dialogue. Well, both candidates said really bad things, right? Drawing equivalencies between the candidates, between people who exist on other sides of the spectrum, is maybe not a productive way to think about it. But if you agree that Trevor Noah, and people turn to him for a worldview that is representative of their own, and people turn to Tomi Lahren for a worldview that is representative of their own, how does that impact the way they see the world, right? 64 million people, like Trevor Noah told us, more people are watching Tomi Lahren than any source of news. And how can we actually deal with that? But thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I think whether or not people go to Comedy Central for humor or the news, Trevor Noah throughout that debate was making fun of Tomi Lahren, and his audience was laughing. So I think that's not the most productive way to have a debate is on a comedy show. That's why I think that the two people on that debate weren't a good choice if you want to have an intellectual debate. Tomi and Trevor would make a good sitcom, but not necessarily a good intellectual discourse.
Okay, so what does that look like for you?
A good intellectual discourse? I don't know, some people that are closer to the middle, I consider myself probably a moderate conservative, but I do have socially liberal views. So if it was someone like me and someone on the other side, then that would probably be more productive, because that way you can go in all sorts of directions instead of just staying on your side.
Alex, Ida, and then yep.
I don't necessarily have an opinion or a stance on it. I'm just mostly trying to reconcile this in my head. But you mentioned a critique about the conversation, which was even legitimizing her views in a discourse is kind of going in the opposite direction of what we should be doing, which is like not even thinking about those things. But then, if we ever hope to reconcile these two viewpoints, how can we do that if we don't engage in some kind of discourse? Because there are people who, whether or not they should think that, they do. So, if we hope to understand them, because you mentioned in order to have discourse, you kind of do have to affirm and legitimize their view so that they can speak on it.
Yeah, so I think there might be an interesting case where, right, so there's not a huge market for moderate views on these kinds of media streams, right? It's not going to go it's not angry enough to go viral. Sort of, it's hard to have like a sexy, attractive spokesperson for like no foreign accent for, right? All these the missing elements of the media to glamorize it. But what about like a moderate person sharing it with someone else who's kind of moderate, fiscally conservative, socially liberal female, and sort of coming together? Look how crazy both of them are, right? Where can we sort of meet in the middle? When did we agree with Trevor? When did we agree with Tomi? Right? Maybe that could be an interesting use of creating more productive discourse than the one that we saw here. Go ahead, Ida. You, and then, then you're next.
I was just going to basically say what you said, that there aren't really many, people who are moderate, in media, because definitely get that much attention, because people are drawn to them more, and offer, but I guess, extreme reviews, so that's what what you said.
Cool.
It seems like you're kind of throwing our where because of that system overall, where you got bipartisan system, where if you're one person, another person. And then moving on to this conversation, your job is sort of to be a little bit really polarizing. You got someone I agree with the front concept. But there's some of these there's people that are practical, real use, and stats. It's not a good problem in the system. People don't like this flamed up, people yelling really rapidly instead of real fast. So you're listening to more of you instead of the show where you're entertaining.
So that's really tough, right? From my perspective, Trevor Noah isn't wrong because he's super liberal, right? Trevor Noah understands that that mass incarceration, that the actor at the BET Awards wasn't being anti-white, he's being pro-black. That that these oppressions are real, that can be really big, deep systemic problems, and that this is sort of if you're in pursuit of justice, then it's really caring about the most oppressed. I have a case for why Trevor Noah, A, represents my worldview, and B, he's not wrong. And you can turn it into a statistics battle, but at the end of the day, a lot of the times generating those statistics are to reinforce a worldview you already have. So I don't know if statistics and facts really function any differently than people talking on Comedy Central. They're just produced to reinforce one side or the other. Because at the end, think tanks. I worked in a think tank. I entered a think tank. It was the worst, right? You can predict the policy outcomes based on the name of the institution, right? Who the donors are. You can predict all the information that we're being produced already has this ideology attached to it. And I don't know necessarily if there's this disembodied, disinterested sort of statistician up in the tower somewhere coming up with the reality that if all of these things exist in a context, then how do we take a whole picture together? I've never been in an exchange of statistics and facts that have been productive, any more or less productive than what we saw here. And if someone has a different experience, please share it now, because I would love to hear that. Who else wanted to speak? Is there anyone else? Yeah, and then anyone else who hasn't spoken yet that wants to speak? Yeah, go ahead.
I think in general, like, in our day, people have conversations about politics. Like, personally, it's always very awkward having conversations about, like, political issues, or sometimes we disagree with someone. So I think the fact that it was on Comedy Central was almost, like, good, because it provided, like, some comic relief to, like, that situation, because it is, like, it can be kind of stressful and, like, frustrating. And, like, to have that comedy aspect of it, I mean, I think it opens it up to, like, a larger audience, because
yeah, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good that you have two people who kind of are on different ends of the spectrum talking, but my problem isn't that they're not moderate enough. My problem is that they're not willing to budge at all on anything, because I think it will hurt their image.
Okay. I'll get you, but anyone else who hasn't spoken yet that wants to share their piece? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just the same thing. I have a feeling just watching that there are probably times when maybe not Trevor Noah or Tomi Lahren would have totally conceded a point, but if they had just been arguing or debating without television cameras on, that they would have been able to concede some minor points, been able to say, yeah, that sounds reasonable to me, but I just don't think this outlet provided any room for either of them to budge without being crucified by their own kind of contingencies. Because people, I mean, a lot of these people say they want people to budge and consider other opinions unless, you know, they're budging away from my opinions. That, so I don't think that would be received well, and I think most of them know that they're leaving potential audience.
So the one thing I would add is that symbolically it might be great if one of or the two of them conceded a point. I don't know if that necessarily changes the fundamentals of what they represent. And it's really thinking seriously about how this influences the way we see things. And I fall back onto this idea of I'm not being too extreme. Like it's my opinion that all of this is not necessarily up to opinion, right? There's this compelling case for why Tomi Lahren perpetuates white supremacy of the level that is either, I mean, the modern some people refer to it as a lowercase KKK, right? The alt-right. Right? These views are so oppressive and function in society is so corrosive that they actually threaten the lives of many people, right? There's a strong case to be made there, and I think that it's not necessarily. I think it's tough to sit here and say that you're wrong just because you're on the extreme of an issue. I think that you can say that the threats that I experience every day are so extreme that this is the position that I'm taking. Right, so I think it's worth. I think we're all conditioned to say that the answer is always somewhere in the middle, but I want to push back against that as being necessarily the case. John, go ahead.
That, like, if you look at like an actual debate, like people kind of are in this assumption that a debate requires there to be a change in someone thinking, otherwise it's not successfully going to do your job. But a debate is just a discussion between topics. There's no expectation for someone to concede because you're having a televised discussion. Like, I'll have discussions with people, and in the real world, whether there's cameras on me or not, they're in a position that I will not move. And I just won't. So I feel like it's reflective on the way people actually discuss things. And the way I think someone said over there, considering an opinion, considering that someone has an opinion, and is it the same as like and understanding that someone has an opinion is different than saying that okay, maybe I can see your point, I can see where you're coming from. You can say, oh, I understand you have an opinion, but this is mine, and I don't really understand why you have that opinion. But I'm respecting the fact as another human being that you have it. So I think there's a distinction.
Right, and I think one of the reasons why I started to clarify why I can't necessarily see it as a difference in opinion is that fundamental where, like in the Kaepernick slide, where that begins from. the fundamental premise for a lot of these arguments is what oppression? I don't believe in oppression. I don't see oppression. I see black successful people and Jay-Z and Beyonce. Like, I see these things, and I don't fundamentally see why these minority groups are complaining about anything at all. So for me, the fundamental point of interest here is why some people cannot recognize an oppression that I know to be true. Right? And does that really come down to being a question of opinion? I mean, I think in some regards, and again, that goes back to, that's a different conversation than we both think that poverty should be eradicated, but we think that one should go on to, you should use the church, you should use mission trips, you should build businesses, and the other is that you should, do government policy, right? That's a disagreement, a difference in opinion that shares a goal. And I think the fundamental premise for a lot of what we see in this really divisive election and this divisive conversation is not agreeing on the fundamental fact of the oppression. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to address something you said earlier. I kind of agree with what you're saying about how statistics and think tanks are kind of geared towards they're kind of they kind of do the study already the goal that they want to have. But at the same time, I think it's dangerous to say that statistics and facts don't have any value, because there are plenty of examples of arguments where, with minimum wage, for example, the fight for 15, that all comes out of statistics and objective, fairly objective stats. You can dispute statistics, but some are pretty objective that say, someone should be able to make this amount of money, and people agree with it or disagree with it. But I think a lot of the problem with say something that Tomi Lahren says is, some of what she said that creates this worldview that people have is based off of her ideas. But when you don't use numbers, if someone said, well, this is what she said about this, but these numbers dispute that, I feel like that's very powerful in gearing people's minds towards getting towards that objective kind of truth. Because the facts, that's kind of where the objectivity kind of belongs.
Okay, so I want to use two examples. One is the amount of mass shootings that have occurred in this country and no change in gun legislation. Or, if anything, reinforcing people's rights to right? I can come up with a ton of examples where the evidence is so overwhelming, right? You talk to anybody who's a criminologist or a sociologist, and they say, we've been saying this for decades. We know that there's this inequality. We know that these are deep-seated structural things that somebody stopping cursing in rap music or pulling up their pants is not going to change the fundamentals of an economic inequality. We know that these deaths happen from guns, and we don't. A lot of times, I point to this to say that facts don't seem to persuade people. Rhetoric persuades people, and rhetoric is what people pay attention to. I can provide you facts that I know in the deepest of my hearts is this is oppression that I experience every day or somebody else experiences every day, and that still doesn't seem to be enough unless maybe you try to understand the other person's perspective, right? Unless maybe, even then it's a big question mark. And then the other end of this particular administration is the first major press conference that happened after the inauguration was about Trump's crowd sizes, right? This is fairly quantitative, right? You can not only visually see the difference, right? I would argue that most people who supported Trump do not actually live in the D.C. area. It's a liberal stronghold of Maryland and that area. I would argue that that's one of the reasons why people didn't turn out to his inauguration. But to have an entire press conference saying, look, you lost the main, we want you to take the spirit of the inauguration instead of reporting the facts. We basically want you, the media, to make the presidency look good, and that's how you're going to support the president, right? So I really have a hard time seeing examples where facts, even so straightforward as visual images of how many people showed up, really swaying, especially a candidate like Trump or a now president like Trump, and that's when you hear people talk about gaslighting, falling into that, and alternative facts and things like that. Again, anyone else who hasn't spoken that wants to say something, I'm going to wait 15 seconds. Just give you a chance. So we've been hearing from the same folks. Get your voice in there. Yeah.
I think one of the things with comedy, I know we were talking about this a little bit earlier, is that it's not, I think especially in the John Stewart area, a lot of people watched it because he made fun of both sides. And he took sort of a middle objective, not objective ground, but, he made fun of the George Bush administration as well as, just stupidity in general. And he took that, sort of position that we all need to do better. And I'm not sure if Trevor Noah does the same thing, but I think one of your viewers talking about how the viewers don't really want them to concede points. But I would argue that the viewers want truth, and they want Trevor Noah to speak truth and what's actually going on. And I think it was during the middle of the actual interview, he said to Tomi, look, you won. This is you're American, you won this. And he was just, after that, he was just trying to see where can we find the middle ground, where can we go to talk about this, where can we both agree and to move from here.
Yeah, I'm really sorry that the projection stopped working, and we might be able to help that in our conversation. I guess the one thing I would add is, I totally forgot. Go ahead.
Yeah, what you were saying earlier about any concession being symbolic, I do agree with that, but I do think that symbolism also could be very powerful, because I understand that extreme opinions are okay, but what I want out of my media are, and if they're going to have an extreme opinion, I want it to be an authentic extreme opinion. And I think there's a serious mistrust that especially these types of shows and just conservative talk radio, liberal talk radio in general, have these very extreme issues to try to fabricate some kind of debate. They're offshoots of what these people really believe, but they're ramped up for the platform. So I just think what that symbolism of a small concession would have shown was that these people aren't playing a game necessarily. These people are being people and engaging in something. And so maybe it wouldn't have really changed anybody's mind, but I think people would have been more open to it. I think that's why people are complaining about two people being very extreme. If there's just an immediate skepticism that we're not maybe being authentic.
Yeah, so really cool stuff. So a couple of things. There is conservative talk radio. There's very little liberal talk radio. There is Daily Show, John Stewart, Stephen Colbert. There isn't so much of a conservative parallel. Very interesting thing to pay attention to. I like what you're saying. So one is providing an example of what concessions even look like as maybe a way of putting that forward. And that goes back to something else I mentioned before. Also it's it's 3:30. If you want to leave now, you can stay or you can go as well. Yeah, I know. I had to stop, otherwise I would have just kept going.
She has.
Oh, yeah, no, good. Yeah, you're welcome.